In part two of our discussion on critical theory, we'll discuss the entirely distinct social theories of Jürgen Habermas and Patricia Hill Collins. Habermas is a quintessentially European approach to the analysis of social life, while Patricia Hill Collins is solidly embedded in the American tradition of theoretical approaches that address wide-ranging but specific social. Jürgen Habermas was a post-World War II social theorist influenced by the Frankfurt School, who we talked about in part one, who viewed rationalization and reason, those elements we discussed in part one, as not necessarily being entirely negative. Remember Weber's iron cage of bureaucracy. An overemphasis on rationalization at the expense of all else was one of the sources of Weber's definition. Habermas thought that rationalization could have a good side, that it brought us the rule of equality under law. For Habermas, though, there was a threat. The threat was not based solely on Marx's economic model of unequal social classes, or in the inequality that Weber viewed emergent from the class, status, and party elements. Instead, the threat came from forms of symbolic reproduction, socialization, identity formation, and social integration. You may remember social integration from Durkheim's focus. The challenges to this element of social life pose the greatest threat, according to Habermas, to freedom. Habermas's central concept was the life world, or the background of shared social meanings that individuals draw on to construct commonly understood approaches to our shared social world. But economic and legal forces comprised what Habermas termed the system. The economic arrangements, social institutions, and legal, medical, and family systems, all the elements of society that we consider to be social institutions, affect this life world, this cultural normative aspect of society, through what Habermas terms systems steering media, the mechanism through which the economic and legal systems are ran. For Habermas, the crisis emerges when dominant players in the economy take over the system's steering media and increasingly encroach on the life world. Habermas terms this the colonization of the life world. This crisis comes when all social relations, our values, our norms, the way we socialize children, and the way we are socialized throughout our lives as adults into new roles and undergo this socialization, are all mediated through power and money, the elements of the social system that represent the interests of the powerful. Habermas' solution, what he terms communicative action. This is a process whereby people come to a mutual understanding through open, non-coercive debate. This is the promise of reason for Habermas, and this communicative action holds a possibility of creating a better civil society. Habermas is often labeled an optimist for certain. Now let's do a complete 180-degree turn and consider Patricia Hill Collins. Here's where I have some insight that perhaps your text authors don't have, and they're great social theorists. I've personally had question and answer sessions with both Dorothy Smith and Patricia Hill Collins. Collins herself distanced her work from Smith's standpoint epistemology, although there are elements of it that are similar. Standpoint epistemology was, according to Dorothy Smith, the viewpoint that when one knows what one knows is affected by the standpoint one has in society. Think about Charlotte Perkins Gilman for a minute. She was sort of a pre-epistemologist or a proto-epistemologist in terms of women's views. What is epistemology? It's a term that means how we know what we know and how we decide what is valid. Smith, as a Canadian woman and as a scholar, could situate herself in a context where there were comparatively fewer ways that an individual, by virtue of their characteristics, could experience domination or be the dominator. Canadian Indigenous people and a linguistic minority of Quebecois and language oppression notwithstanding. Standpoint theory as well as postmodernism, which we'll address in a subsequent video, are only examples of critical theory, not the core, according to what Collins' main contribution is that for a theory to be critical, unlike some forms of postmodernism, it has to have a commitment to what Collins terms justice for one's own group and for other groups. For Collins, critical social theory illuminates the bodies of knowledge and sets of institutional practice that actively grapple with the central questions facing groups of people differentially placed in specific political, social, and historical contexts, characterized by injustice. Collins maps differences in penalty and privilege that come with one's location in social structures of class, race, gender, sexuality, nationality, and other similar systems of social injustice in what he terms a matrix of domination. There is not one essential standpoint. It is contextual. According to Collins, in her own words, a person occupies multiple locations depending on the context. An individual may be an oppressor, a member of an oppressed group, or simultaneously an oppressor and oppressed. People simultaneously experience and resist oppression on three levels, according to Collins. The level of personal biography, the group or community level of the cultural context created by race, class, gender, and so forth, and the institutional level. Collins insists for women of color that African American women come to their own epistemological reality, self-validating, so that they can move forward with the conceptual tools necessary to move forward with a justice agenda. She challenges, for example, both Afrocentric ways of knowing, making them include gender in their assessments, and with feminism for being aware that feminist thought is not the province of white women alone, and that there are alternative voices within feminist thought. This is Patricia Hill Collins' major contribution to critical theory in the 21st century.